Hi, Honey family. Welcome back. I have a good assortment of stories for you today, so sit back, enjoy the show. If you like what you hear, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. Story 1. Fear. My creepiest experience is really more of a possession than a ghost story. I was helping another nurse with a patient that had lived a very hard life. There was numerous things going on with him. You name it, he had it going on, and this man was terrified to die. Every time one of his monitors would beep, he would just go into rage, screaming, "Don't let me die, don't let me die." The other nurse and I soon found out why he didn't want to die. Sometime in the middle of the night, one of his monitors started alarming. We rushed into his room, me tagging along behind, pulling the crash cart. When I got into his room, the other nurse was completely white, ghost white. This man was sitting about 2 inches above the bed and was laughing. His whole look completely changed. His eyes just had this look of pure evil on them, and he had this evil smile on his face. He laughed at us and said, "You stupid bitches aren't going to let me die, will you?" And then he laughed again. We kind of froze. I reached up and hit the code button, and when I did, he crashed back onto his bed. 2 minutes later, as his room is literally filled with other code teams, he sits up, says, "You let him die. Too bad," and then begins laughing again. The man collapsed back onto the bed. We heard a horrible, agonizing scream. Actually, every patient on our ward that night commented about hearing that scream. And then you could hear, "Don't let me die," being whispered throughout the whole unit. Every one of the nurses that night was pale and scared. Nobody went anywhere by themselves. By morning, the whispers of "Don't let me die" were gone. The night shift nurses had a prayer service in the break room before we left to go home. And we all had nightmares about this patient and his death for weeks. Story 2. Night shift. I was working a night shift job as an aide caring for a lady with terminal cancer on hospice in her home. I've done this kind of job for years. She was starting to slip, so I woke her family, 2 girls and her husband. We were all sitting around, and she was pretty quiet and peaceful. All of a sudden, she looked towards the door and said, Rex, you're here for me. I'm ready, but they won't let me go." I saw a shadowy figure come into the room. I felt the creepiest evil presence. I'm not normally spooked, but I was so glad when it was my time to go home. I turned to watch the spirit, and the family was just looking at me like, "What are you looking at?" The lady died later that day. A few months later, her husband fell sick, just not well. He wasn't terminal or anything. So they called my agency to see if I could come and stay with him at nights for a few days until he was strong enough to be on his own again. I stayed for 2 nights. All kinds of weird paranormal stuff happened in that house. Voices in rooms that were empty. The sound of people moving around when everyone was asleep. I decided that I didn't care how sick he was or how much that family liked me. I was not taking another shift there. It was just not worth it. Story 3. Willie. In bed 3 in our unit, there was a patient named Willie. Well, that's what I'll call him, at least. Thanks to modern medicine, he was kept alive for much longer than he really probably should have been. I think around 3 months. There was no family there to stop care. Willie eventually died, but patients who are put in that bed will talk about their friend Willie, who either brought them a blanket or stopped by for a chat. Bed 3 is at the end of our unit and has an anteroom before you actually go into the room. You can't see directly bed 3 unless you are in the anteroom or looking at the room on the monitor. One night, with no patient in bed 3, the monitor flips to that room, and there's a body seen laying over the side of the bed, over one of the side rails, kind of floating there. The room was checked, and no one was there. Another night, a nurse who has worked the unit a few years saw someone sitting in a chair behind the door in bed 3 with their legs crossed. She wondered, since we have limited visiting hours, how a family member had got in the room. She went into the room, and there was no one there. She was pretty freaked out by that experience. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I really do appreciate it.